Hi, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if it's your first time here. I'm Lindsay, and I will address the elephant in the room. Yeah, I still have my ghost up despite it being well past Halloween. No, for the real elephant in the room, I drastically changed my hair because I really wanted to, and I do quite like it. I love this color. I love my natural hair color, but I just wanted to try something new, and I've been wanting fringe for a while. It might be a bit long. I'm trying to decide because the thing is, like, I have curly hair. It's not as curly right now because it's winter, but, well, it's not technically winter, it's just very cold outside. But the fringe didn't curl up. We weren't sure how much the fringe would curl up, so. And then, like, also how it lays. It's kind of laying kind of awkwardly, I think, right now, but I do like how it looks despite that. It's just my part's figuring itself out, so that's yeah. So, I promised this video last week. It's a review of the Letters of Enchantment duology. I only have the second book with me. The first book is in the States. Excuse me. But I'm just gonna kind of do a spoiler-free review as I've done before with duologies and series. But I am going to speak my truth on it despite it being spoiler-free. First of all, seeing like letters through the wardrobe at the beginning of the first book. As people probably know, I am obsessed with Narnia. I actually am fiddling with a Narnia bookmark, and I very much felt connected to that, and that immediately pulled me in. So I do feel like there was a bit of inspiration from Narnia here because the wardrobes are a big part of the story. So with that, plus with the prologue of Iris sending her brother Forrest off, there's a lot of like familial love throughout this book that's very heartwarming but heart-wrenching. That did immediately pull me in. Anyway, the book is set in this world where there is a war amongst gods that mortals are very much pulled into and fight in. They fight in the war. They are soldiers of the war. So it follows Iris Monroe, who's a journalist, and her brother Forrest is fighting in said war, and she is struggling financially. She is living with her alcoholic mother, and she is trying to get a promotion at work. We also get the point of view of her work rival, Roman, who Iris believes comes from money, and he is still competing with her for that promotion at work, though, so there's that. And there's also the fact that he is writing an article on missing soldiers, and Iris believes that her brother is missing at war, so there's all of that coming together. The tide starts to turn though when we find out that Iris has been writing her brother letters and slipping them into the wardrobe that she used to share that ends up being a magical wardrobe, which all wardrobes are magical if you were obsessed with Narnia enough as a kid. Did I crack the back of my parents' wardrobe trying to get into Narnia? You can't prove it. So while trying to get the letters to her brother, she ends up finding that there is a magical tie between her wardrobe and Roman that makes it so she is writing to Roman, and that ties them together. But also Roman and Iris have so many parallels in their life, like they're truly soulmates in my opinion, like truly written as soulmates, but I digress. So things progress from there and a lot of things unravel that show what is truly happening with this war. There is a lot of mystery around this war, but in a way that makes sense because it is about gods who are of myths that Iris admits to not having learned a lot about in school, so it makes sense for her to not know a lot, especially since it takes place in the East and she's in the West. Let me double check on that. It's the opposite. It takes place in the West and she's in the East, so she is kind of far removed from this war. So knowing what the protagonist knows is, I think, a good way to set that up. At least tell us that she was not as educated on these gods and what they're fighting over, and is so far removed from the war that she doesn't quite understand it. Like, everything she knows in the beginning is all hearsay. Also, there is world building done in the dialogue, but with Iris being a journalist, a lot of the world building is done through articles, which I thought was really interesting, and also because a lot of the story takes place around these letters. World building is done in the letters, so I do think that was a good way to do that. And in the first book, the pacing is done in a way that, for me, like, made it so I didn't want to put the book down because you're getting little pieces, like, throughout the story. It's like collecting pieces to a puzzle and putting it all together. The second book shifts focus a bit to tell us more about Dacker. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing them right, but the two gods that the war revolves around, Dacker and Emba. It tells us more about their story, their backgrounds. We learned a lot more about the war, so it makes sense to kind of have that shift of focus, especially since, like, when it comes to like Iris and Roman's story, I felt like they had a lot of development in the first book that they didn't need a second book just all about them, but it's still their point of views for the most part. So I do have some criticisms of this second book, especially. I would say this one's definitely a personal preference, but like if a character loses their memory and it's their point of view and they can't remember their name, I don't think the narration should necessarily say their name. I think I was gonna say, does that make sense? But I say that too much, so I just paused for a second to make sure I didn't say that. I think it should be more so that from context clues, the reader can infer that it's them. Like, I don't think the reader has the inability to understand who a character is, especially if you know this character lost their memory, and this is the second book, like, we know this character, we can infer that it's this character, but if they can't remember who they are, I think it would better connect you to them in the story if, like, the narration isn't saying their name. I would just like that. I just think that would add another layer to that. And I will be honest and say in the second book, I was finding myself to be a bit bored. I do think, like, the first one didn't have the fastest pace either, but the second one I think dragged even more, and so it could also be where I was at in life. I wasn't like, I mean, I just read it in the second book, and I've, mentioned in my last video, I've not been in, like, the best place mentally, but, like, so I wasn't, like, super excited to read it. There was definitely parts where I wanted to know what happened next. It's kind of similar with the Serpent and the Wings of Night, where I was like, I'm not super into this book, but there are parts that I want to know what happens next. I do still like these characters, I do still like the story, and I do think it's really important to have a story like this. It's like a romantasy. The romance is very heavy. It's a very big part of the story, but the war and the mythology, and I'll get more into that, is also a super big part of the story. But that being said, it could be just with how I've been feeling recently why I wasn't getting super into it, but I do generally think the pacing was dragging a bit, especially in the first half of the book. And the final criticism I have is something I've had with a lot of recent publications, and this is a bigger issue, has a lot to do with modern publishing, has a lot to do with, like, modern marketing, and has a lot to do with capitalism, but this is a whole thing where, like, it pretty much just all boils down to that. But it is something that I wish there's a way to fight back, of just, like, the disappearance of subtext, or the way that something would be stated in the subtext, and I would be like, I know what you're saying here, but then it would be explicitly stated as well, and I just personally just don't like being coddled like that, and I hate the disappearance of subtext. So that is something that I just keep saying in, like, so many reviews, but I'm never gonna stop saying it, because I just genuinely, like, can't live with that. Like, I just wish that something could be done. And I don't know if me continually stating this will help, but I'm gonna hope that it does, that people know that readers don't want to be coddled. I'm gonna be very vocal about that. And, like, the thing is, yes, this is YA, but YA readers can definitely pick up on subtext, and I think that's how you learn as well. Like, you have to read things with subtext, and you have to do things that, okay, like, in a film example, if you watch things that have more visual storytelling and you sit there and try to pick it apart, that's how you learn how to do that. So I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword. When you get rid of subtext and that kind of stuff, then the ability to pick up on subtext and have that media literacy and, like, critical thinking skills. Like, you can complain about the disappearance of critical thinking skills, but then put subtext in things. Like, and I'm not even blaming Rebecca Ross, because I know this is just how things are right now. But I'm gonna keep complaining about it just in hope that it helps change things, because you don't have to coddle YA readers either. You just simply do not. I was a YA reader, and I learned critical thinking skills, and I learned how to do literary analysis, and I think that's important. I don't know. Anyway, on to more positives. This has very pretty prose, this duology. It's very heartwarming and heart-wrenching. I think it could be a bit flowery at times, but in a way that I didn't really mind. And I think the world building was done decently well. I think the subtle explanations of the magic and where it comes from and how it works was nicely done. It wasn't too overwhelming. It wasn't an overwhelming amount of information, but it wasn't leaving me with a ton of questions either. I think it was cool how she made it have its own mythology, and how that was a big part of the story. Like, there is a story within the story when it comes to the mythology and the gods, and there's parts of me that wonders if it was inspired by, like, Hades and Persephone, because I did see a few similarities between those. But even if it was, like, Rebecca Ross made this really well fleshed out world and made it have its own mythology, whether it was inspired by Greek mythology or not, and maybe it was inspired by Roman mythology, considering there's a character named Roman. But even if it was, it still showed that a lot of thought and care went into this story. With that, I do want to emphasize what I kind of talked about earlier, the way that this is the romance, like, it is romance heavy, but it does a really good job of mixing in the fantasy world and the mythology and the war and the politics of it all with the romance. It is not just romance. with a fantasy setting, if that makes sense. Like it definitely did. I said if that makes sense. It definitely did mix it all together, I think, pretty well. Because while it is a very romantic story at its core, it's still the politics, the world building, the mythology, it's all very compelling. And I also, this is a random sidebar, I really loved Iris's moniker being Little Flower. I think that's so cute. I think a like unique little nickname. I mean, her name's Iris, but like, I just love anything that is not just a normal pet name, like giving people very specific nicknames to who they are, like Iris, Little Flower. I'm just a fan. And I also love, like, it being a very romantic story, it still has some very, very heartwarming platonic moments between characters. Like, I loved Addie and Marisol, and then there's, obviously, I mentioned, like, siblings being a big part of this story, but the friendships and that kind of stuff, like, it didn't just emphasize the romantic love and romantic relationships. There were platonic relationships forming and evolving as well. That was very important to me. There is sex, but it's YA, so it's not graphic, and it's very flowery writing. I think a lot of this writing, as I already mentioned, was very flowery, kind of like almost a poetic type of prose. And the book did make me cry because of like the parts of the war that were so, it really gets into the nitty-gritty and what it's like to be like in the front lines of war. And I think it also has like a really important message about like, this is a war between gods, between two higher powers, but the people that are really suffering from it and are really fighting in it are like just normal everyday people because of these two higher powers conflict. And it's something that really like you would digest and think about. I don't know, y'all know I'm like politically very left, so. But that is my entire review. I think I said pretty much everything. Okay, of course the camera died like mid-outro and I'm exhausting the battery, so I really have to wrap this up. That is pretty much all I have to say about the book. I liked it, or the duology, I liked it. I don't know if I'm gonna go back and reread it ever, but maybe I'll like be in a better headspace and want to go back. Okay, super quick. If you like this, like and subscribe. Okay, if you like this, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in a week. Bye!